This is A Different Perspective with Kevin Randle. A retired U.S. Lieutenant Colonel, Kevin Randle has been studying UFOs for nearly 50 years. Kevin has investigated some of the most famous UFO cases in the world and has been consulted for dozens of documentaries about UFOs. Considered one of the leading experts into the Roswell UFO crash of 1947, Kevin has written more than 25 books about UFOs, including the recently published Roswell in the 21st Century. Now, here is the host of A Different Perspective, Kevin Randle.
And welcome to this edition of A Different Perspective. I am, in fact, Kevin Randle, as promised in the intro. Before I bring my guest on, Bill Puckett, I am going to engage in what used to be called a rant. I now think of it as a intense monologue. Over the years, I have been accused of having fake degrees, college degrees, and it's just come up again. And this is the last thing I'm going to say about it. I'm going to provide the information for anybody who wants to check it. Don't care. I went to the University of Iowa. I have a degree. It was called a Bachelor of General Studies. I had majored in anthropology. In the last semester, I was inadvertently put in the wrong class, so I could not fulfill the foreign language requirement for the anthropology degree, but I had to graduate at that time because I was also taking ROTC and I needed to get my commission at that time. So I had to drop the class, and the solution was I'd take a Bachelor of General Studies, but my major was anthropology. And for those of you who are interested, I was a warrant officer in Vietnam, and that did not preclude me from taking ROTC when I returned to the United States. So to clear that up. Once we had graduated, and I say we, I'm thinking of Bob Cornett, who I've mentioned on the program before, and we're still in the Iowa City area at the University of Iowa, and we decided we'd take some graduate courses. I'd taken the graduate record review, or whatever the heck it was called, examination, and we went to the School of Journalism for the graduate program, and we're told that they really didn't want us in the program. It was designed more for students who hadn't had any publications, who needed a leg up in journalism. In today's environment, I think it would be because we were both white male and they just didn't want to in the program, but we were allowed a temporary grant into the program. We went down the list of the instructors, and we were finding out that most of them had not published anything. And we're thinking, what can we learn from these people that hadn't published anything? Until we found a fellow named Clarence Andrews, who had published a lot and was very, very good for what we wanted. And we took classes from him. Life got in the way. Didn't finish out graduate school there, but later on I decided to do that, and I went through a number of exercises to find a college or university with a graduate program that was of interest to me, and came up with California Coast University. This was before online was a big deal. That time was called distance learning. The school was accredited through the Distance Learning Association, both in the federal government and the state of California. So I don't know why they would call it a fake degree. It wasn't like I wrote 10,000 words and sent in $300 and they sent a degree. I took all the classes, including one in statistics that nearly killed me. And it was eventually awarded a PhD from the California Coast University. If you look it up today, it's still an accredited university. I don't know what the problem with fake degree is. I also have a master's in the art of military science from the military university in Manassas, Virginia. And it's a degree program that an awful lot of military officers use. Once you move out of the company grade officer rank, that would be lieutenants and captains, move into the field grade ranks, majors and above, you almost have to have an advanced degree. So I took an advanced degree from the American Military University. And it's a degree recognized by the Army and everybody else. So I don't know what's fake about that degree either. So that's kind of an update on my degrees. University of Iowa, fully accredited. California Coast University, if you look it up, it's accredited. American Military University, it's accredited. All degrees were accepted by the United States Army, for example, as legitimate degrees. So anybody talking about fake degrees, don't pay any attention to them. Well, that's my intense monologue for the day. I'm joined by Bill Puckett, who was employed as a meteorologist with the National Weather Service for 3 years and the Environmental Protection Agency for 27 years. He retired from the government service in 2007 He is a professional member of the American Meteorological Society. He has worked as a consultant for the UFO Hunters series on the History Channel and has appeared on 2 UFO Hunters episodes. He also appeared on an episode of the Science Channel's Close Encounters series. He is also a research associate with NARCAP, National Reporting Center for Anomalous Phenomena. He is accredited with meteorological and radar analysis for the November 7, 2006 UFO sightings at O'Hare International Airport. Puckett is formerly a state director for MUFON UFO Network in Montana. I almost said Minnesota for some bizarre reason. And it's right here. It says Montana, bigger in life. He is a certified field investigator from MUFON and has written several technical articles for the MUFON Journal. He has been a guest on many talk shows and radio programs, but none as important as this one, I'm sure. He continues to work as an independent investigator and presents the results of his studies at his website, UFOs Northwest and UFO Sightings Montana, which is www.ufosightingsmontana.com, which is all lowercase, and the other one is www.ufosnw.com. Welcome to A Different Perspective, William Puckett.
Thanks for the intro, Kevin. Good to talk to you again on this nice sunny fall day here in Helena, Montana. A beautiful day.
Well, we're not having a nice sunny day here in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, but that's okay. We don't care because we're inside. So there you have it.
Okay. Likewise.
I think what we need to talk about is the trends in UFOs, because you host a website that posts quite a few UFO sightings. You get a lot of UFO sightings. One of the trends I've noticed here is an awful lot of Starlink satellites.
Yes. I have to say, I almost like to call it IFOs Northwest, because 90% of the sightings I've had in the past 6 months are Starlink satellites. I've put stuff out there for people to, I post videos, I post photos, but people still keep reporting them. They keep launching them, and the more of them that are out there, and it's been kind of a dry year, at least in the Western U.S., so there are just lots of reports. And then there's been rocket reports. There's a lot of people that take photos and then find UFOs after the fact. That's been some. And Jupiter has been bright. A lot of reports on Jupiter. Also Chinese lanterns. So I haven't had any really good compelling reports. So they've been few and far between. Some of the photos you can say, well, maybe they're real, maybe they're not. Even though they're, they find something in the photo, but they don't see it beforehand. Some witnesses won't tell me whether they saw it and took a picture of it or they found it after the fact. But I have to say that a real high percentage of cases have been straightforward IFOs. I mean, there's just no doubt about it, particularly the Starlink satellites. Space station, that's another generator of UFO reports. So,
I have posted to my blog a number of times pictures of the Starlink satellites. And when I do other programs, we talk about this. I also mentioned the Starlink satellites in the photographs, trying to get the word out there that these lines of lights moving across the sky are probably Starlink satellites, especially if they're in a trail formation. But I don't think we've gotten the word out yet.
Yeah, I'm surprised because some of the people reporting are seemingly pretty intelligent, and it's also quite interesting. Two people can see the same thing and report something entirely different. One person will say, oh, it was one ship and it was moving across the sky and they were doing a little zigzagging. Well, that's just an optical illusion called autokinesis. But it's just interesting how two people can see the same thing and almost report something, 180 degrees different. I've noticed that a number of times.
Well, I mean, we all say in the UFO community say that I think 95% of the UFOs that are reported are really IFOs. I think it's closer to 99%.
I do too. I would agree with that.
Are identifiable if you understand what's going on in the sky around you. Venus is always a big one, especially when it's close and things like that. But let's move toward the UFO aspect of it. What are some of the good UFO reports that you've received recently?
I'll have to pull up my website here and take a look at cases, but there have been...
well, I know there's been some very interesting photographs at your website that I've posted to my blog as well and linked back to your website.
One report that I'd like to mention, this was May 11th, 2022, in the highlight of the case, oval metallic object found in photo of contrails. Now, the witness didn't see the object, but when he looked at the photos, he found something interesting. And I blew the photo up, and it's quite clearly an object because you can see the sun shining right off the top of it. And this was Wilsonville, Oregon, May 11th, 2022. Wilsonville is looks to be, I would say, about 30 miles southwest of Portland, Oregon, to give you a perspective. And I really think that was a real object, just based on that the sun shining off of it. And I had to do a blow up to do that. So that's another one case that stood out to me. I posted that quite a while ago, but another case.
Well, let's do this. I've got to take a break here, so let's do this. Let's get to that other case when we get back in just a moment, and get into some of the details of some of the interesting sightings that have been reported in the last year or 2 years or something like that. Once again, his website is to take a look at the photographs and that sort of thing is www.ufosnw.com, all lowercase. My blog is, of course, www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. And I usually have some commentary or some additional information on the blog about our discussion each week about the UFOs, maybe some additional information, maybe some links to other places where you can get additional information about what we were talking about. And I think it's important to take a look at that. In these kind of programs, we don't have a chance to go into depth in some of this stuff. And by placing information on the blog with those who are interested, we get into much more depth in what we were talking about and maybe get into some ideas of what's going on. We will be back right after this with Bill Puckett talking about current trends in UFOs and that sort of thing. So please stick around. And we are back. I'm here with Bill Puckett. Before I get to that sighting, I just do something I never do. I just, for some reason, do not promote my books well enough. And I think what I would like to say, if you're interested in the Roswell case, I've done a book called Understanding Roswell. It gives you a good history of the people who are involved and some of the things that we hadn't talked about much related to the case and that sort of thing. So I think we need to take a look at Understanding Roswell. And I did a book called Level Land, which is about the sightings from November of 1957. I think this is a very important case because of all the interaction with the environment, the number of witnesses involved, the police, the military, and all of that sort of thing. So I think we need to take a look at that. So if you get a chance, take a look at Level Land, take a look at Understanding Roswell. And don't forget the other fine books I've written as well, some of which I even enjoyed. So there you go. Bill, when we went away, you were about to mention an interesting sighting that had come up. So let's have some of the details.
Okay, yeah, let me go through a few more of them here. One case that I found quite interesting, I'll highlight it. It was in Easley, South Carolina. Easley is, it looks like it's in western South Carolina, probably in the mountains. And
now on your website, when you have a sighting, you do have a little bit of a map there with a pinpoint of where the actual sighting took place.
Yes,
so people can get an idea of exactly where it is in the state.
It pinpoints exactly where it was, and this particular one it's kind of out in the western South Carolina, northwestern South Carolina, quite a ways from any major cities. So it's probably in the mountains, but briefly the witness says, I saw this yesterday. The craft disappears when you change shades to edit. It is like a cloaking field. They are here. We can't see them unless we change our color or vision. I've got more. Well, you can take that the witness is speculating, but it shows when you blow it up, a honeycomb looking object. And I don't think that's a photo anomaly. I think it probably is something real. And the date of the sighting, more recent than the other sightings I just talked about, August 21st, 2022, 6:47 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And I mentioned to our listeners, if you go to my site, you can slice and dice data. You can go to UFO sighting reports and then categories, and you can click on unidentifieds or photos or videos. You can get to these cases pretty fast. And then I've also got top cases, electromagnetic cases, video cases, photo cases, and then you can also go to cases by location. So people can find cases pretty fast on my site. It works pretty well. So that's
what sort of inspired you to get into UFO research?
excuse me, I got a cough. Well, the one thing that really inspired me is, I guess in the early 1980s, actually, you were probably part of that, Kevin. A lot of documentaries started coming out on UFOs. And I looked at it and said, yeah, I've always been interested in UFOs. And so I said, well, maybe I'll just kind of start looking into them. But I really was looking into them, but not doing much with them, in terms of a website or anything. But then in the 1990s, I got more serious about it. And by 1997, I started doing investigations. And in 2003, I bought my site up, UFOs Northwest. But my UFO interest goes all the way back into the 1970s. I bought the Project Blue book, a little pocket book, and it talked about the 11,000 sightings in Project Blue book. But it said like 750 of them were unidentified. And I said, wow, I mean, that's unidentified. That's a lot, That piqued my interest too. So I never really have had my own sighting that I would say was a genuine UFO sighting. I've taken photos and found objects after the fact, but that's how I got interested in the subject.
Well, I was going to say, one of the problems with, citing the 701, I think it was, unidentified cases in Project Blue Book is if they're single witness, it's sometimes hard to get an identification for it because you only have that one perspective to take a look at. And one of the things I've always talked about, if you see you get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, you're outside for whatever reason, calling the dog, calling the cat, something like that, and you look up and you see a light crossing the sky and you say, well, my gosh, it's an alien spacecraft. But what if it's a private plane with his landing light on and it's so far away you can just see the light and you can't hear the engine? There's no way anybody's going to be able to identify that because you're not required to file a flight plan or anything like that. So you've got one witness seeing a light crossing the sky. When we get to the Starlink satellites, we can look at the photographs or look at the timing or whatever, and we can say, well, that's a Starlink satellite. The descriptions fits a Starlink satellite. And I noticed on your on your website, a lot of them says obvious Starlink satellite or Starlink satellite, that sort of thing. So we're running into that problem as well. But we need something more robust than like a single witness seeing a light in the sky to really take a look at a sighting. And there's very good sightings out there like that. You mentioned, I think, or you investigated the Chicago O'Hare sightings back in 2007.
Yes,
from a meteorological standpoint?
Yes, and radar. We really never found any strong scientific basis for, at least from a radar perspective, of something unusual. We looked at both aviation radar and Doppler radar. The Doppler radar, weather radar, was at Romeoville, Illinois, which I believe is about 20 miles south of Chicago, or maybe at least in a vicinity, it might be southwest. And they put Doppler radars out of city centers for a reason, because they don't want the ground clutter to obfuscate the weather returns. Now, Doppler only makes a pass when it's raining or snowing every 6 minutes. And it's not really designed to pick up UFOs or aircraft, because the beam width is only a degree. But if something flies through that beam, it'll pick it up. And we found a return a little over a quarter of a mile where the witnesses saw the disc-shaped object.
Well, give us a little background on the O'Hare sighting. Exactly what was that? What happened?
Well, what happened was United Airlines had a flight taxiing in, and the pilot actually stuck his head out the window and saw this disc-shaped craft, and then they were moving an aircraft into the hangar, and some people flight attendants and people moving the aircraft into a hangar saw this disc-shaped craft hovering above the sea concourse. And then they saw it shoot straight up.
At Chicago O'Hare Airport.
Yes.
Okay, and so they see the disc hovering over the airport.
Right, and it was cloudy day. The sun had quite set. It was still daylight. And then they saw this thing shoot straight up through the overcast and blew a hole the same shape as a disc where it went through. And that generated the sightings. And then one of the dispatcher for United Airlines called the tower and told them about the sighting. That's how it all started. The exact number of witnesses, photos taken and everything, I actually have never seen a photo that I would consider authentic of the O'Hare case. There's some that claim to be, but I can't verify that. But also, to give you a little more.
Let me ask you this: What causes you to doubt the photographs you've seen? What is there something in the photographs that is unusual or strange, or what's the problem with the photographs?
Well, they weren't taken straight up; they were taken at an angle, and I just, there's nothing in the photograph that would tell me that they saw the disc. It just, it didn't look like exactly what people reported they seeing, is what the bottom line. That's why I would discount it. I'm not saying, they might be real, the photos. I can't say whether or not that they are, is what I'm telling you, with a high degree of credibility.
So there are visual problems with the photograph, something on the photograph that suggests it might not be authentic?
Yes, I would say that. And there allegedly are videos taken. I've never seen the videos. Allegedly, Dan Aykroyd has them. But,
And Dan Aykroyd is? Dan Aykroyd, the actor?
Yeah, the comedian, yes. Quite interested in the UFO topic, by the way.
Yes. So we've got lots of people at O'Hare seeing the object visually.
Yes, the tower did not, but keep in mind the overhang from the tower. We did some calculations that were NARCAP, and where the actual UFO was and where the tower overhang was, we determined they would not have been able to see that object. And I don't think it was there very long. It was hovering. But what I would like to add, not only did I work on radar, I worked on the meteorological analysis. And we determined through satellite photos and cloud top photos that those clouds were 10,000 feet thick. And this thing blew a hole in them. And that would have taken a lot of BTUs, a lot of that hole in that cloud. We determined it'd be equivalent of a 747 flying near a Mach 1. They don't fly quite at Mach 1, but near Mach 1 for quite a while, the amount of energy it would have taken to evaporate that cloud. So let me
interrupt because I got to take a break. Can't help it. Got to take a break. Your website, of course, is Northwest UFOs. Take a look at that. There'll be information on my blog. And for those of you interested, there's an awful lot of information about the O'Hare sighting on the internet. Just type in the O'Hare UFO sighting and you'll get additional information. Take a look at some of the photographs, maybe see some of the video. We will be back right after this with Bill Puckett. We'll be talking about UFOs and sightings and that sort of thing. So please hang around. And we are back. I'm here with Bill Puckett. We're talking about UFOs and some historical sightings. His website is www.ufosnw.com, which will have additional information. Lots of sightings up there, lots of photographs, lots of video, that kind of thing for those of you who are interested. When we went away, we were talking about the Chicago O'Hare sightings and there being lots of witnesses, but there was also radar information as well. You mentioned the radar, the Doppler radar from the area south of Chicago. Was there radar sightings from the O'Hare field or other radar sightings that are more oriented toward aviation?
Unfortunately not, but I'd like to add that at the time, there were were two of us that requested the radar data, and I didn't get the local traffic control radar. I got the long range radar, and I think I might have found something different, but I just didn't have the knowledge at the time of asking for the right information. But the data that we did have did show some sightings to the west of the airport, a number of returns moving to the southeast. And with the winds aloft, I figured those very well could have been birds. I don't think they were anything unusual. But the Doppler radar did have that one blip. Was it the UFO? It wasn't right at the exact location where they saw the UFO, but it was close. So that's a possibility. But I think that our radar analysis, in my opinion, was incomplete. I think had we had that other shorter range data, we might have found something. Now, there's a lot of unofficial and other details about that case. The FAA did issue a notice to airmen about a UFO in the area for aircraft taking off and landing. I haven't seen that notice to airmen, but I heard that they did issue one, and they were warning approaching jets and aircraft taking off that there was a UFO in the area and to exercise caution. So, and which is the reason NARCAP investigated it, because NARCAP has the criteria. If it poses a risk to aviation safety, then we look at it. And a lot of UFOs do pose a risk to aviation safety, no doubt about it.
So, well, that's kind of an interesting point you make there, that the UFOs pose a risk to aviation assets. And I know that's one of the things that the government is now going after, suggesting some kind of danger not only to civilian aviation, but of course to military operations as well. And you say that's kind of an ongoing thing, or has been a long-going thing, that there's been a problem with UFOs close to aviation assets?
Well, it's been noted over the years that not just with studies done by NARCAP, but even cases in Project Blue Book, that UFOs are noted to cause problems with compasses and aviation equipment, and that in itself is a major safety issue. I mean, if you're flying IFR and your equipment's not working, you could crash. I mean, that's simple deduction.
What you mentioned the compasses, and that suggests an electromagnetic effect. Is there any cases where UFOs approached close to an airplane and installed the engines in some fashion that you're aware of?
I'm not aware of any engine problems. I am with cars and trucks. I've had several cases of engine stalling, but I'm not aware of that specifically for any aircraft. No. I don't know about that case you're probably familiar with. Dick Haynes wrote about in Australia in the late 70s at Valinovich. His plane crashed, and he had been reporting a UFO buzzing his airplane at the time, and the debunkers claim he didn't have many hours, and they claim that he just got disoriented and crashed. But I question that. I think that could have been an aircraft shutdown in that particular case.
It was my understanding that no wreckage has been found.
That's correct. They never did.
So
they looked right away.
He vanished.
He vanished. And they looked for wreckage right after, he disappeared, and there was no oil slicks, nothing. And they scrutinized it pretty good, my understanding.
Well, this was an Australian who was flying, I think, towards Tasmania.
Yes, I believe that's right. Yes.
Over open ocean.
Yes.
And reported to the flight following that there was something following or something close by, and there were this sound of metallic noises, and the radio transmission ceased, and he has not been found. I looked at that in one of the books I've done, and the interesting thing is all the people who said that they'd seen him since that time. And one of them, he was in Poland, living in Poland or something like that. It's just all these strange things, but nothing that's ever been verified. So he just, I guess in ufology, one of the strange disappearances, we can think of a number of those cases where aviation assets, particularly military craft, have been disappeared by close approach to UFOs.
There was one over the Great Lakes in the early 50s, but I can't exactly say the date and the details of the sighting. But there was an aircraft that reported a UFO and disappeared, and they never have found the airplane.
That was the Kinross case.
Okay.
In 1953, it was an
Sounds
F-94.
about right. Yeah.
F-94, and they were scrambled for a UFO, meaning an unidentified object. Could have been an airplane, could have been something else, and they've been scrambled for lots of things that didn't turn out to be alien spacecraft. But according to what I remember about the case, in fact, when Bob Cornett and I went to the Project Blue Book files, the first case we looked for was the Kinross case, and they just had a folder with 2 pages in it. It was a galley proofs from a debunker's book on UFOs. That was all they had about the Kinross case. But they watched the attempted intercept on radar. The blips merged and never split apart, and one blip left, and the wreckage has never been found. Interestingly, when I was taking ROTC, which I mentioned during the intense monologue, one of the officers assigned to our detachment told me that he had been at True Rocks Air Force Base, I believe at the time. Kinross is part of that whole thing. And he said that they were all well aware of what had happened. And there were 2 schools of thought. One of them was they hit something and crashed into the lake and just sank right down immediately with no oil slick or wreckage or anything like that ever found. The other school of thought was they got taken, that the blips merged and the UFO took them away. But I thought it was interesting that here's a guy who was there telling me that, this is the thought about it. And he said that they were up on a mission sometime after that and found themselves being paced by a UFO.
Interesting.
And he said, they let it go on for a while. And he says, well, we're going to call the break and we'll break toward it and see what happens, which I think was kind of foolish, but that's what they were going to do. Did that sort of thing and flew toward it, and it just took off and left them sort of in the dust. But these were guys who were there in 1953 and guys that I talked to personally. So it's not like I've got it from somebody else who said it was somebody else from somebody else. I was talking to the guys who were actually there.
Right. I'd like to add, and I've done a lot of radar analysis. I even did one as recently as a month ago. And UFOs don't show up on radar a lot. And I think the reason for that is they could be very well radar impervious or have, material that doesn't refract photons. And then if you believe in the shapes, a lot of them are disc-shaped. They don't have a good cross-sectional area. I had a witness in Anchorage, Alaska. I think that was in April of this year. And he saw an aircraft taken off from Anchorage Airport, a light aircraft turning to the north towards Fairbanks, and saw a blue UFO fly right by it. Now, I verified he saw that aircraft because I found a light aircraft on radar right at the time he said turning to the north towards Fairbanks, but I did not find the UFO. But the thing that added credibility is his report was accurate because the aircraft, the transponder, was right at the place and the time where he said it was. So he probably did see a UFO, but it didn't show up on radar. And I think a lot of them don't, is my experience. And some of them do, absolutely.
Well, I've thought for the longest time that our stealth technology kind of argues against the not being UFOs because they don't show up on radar frequently.
Right.
And we've got the capability now to mask our own aircraft from radar. So the cross section is so small, it's almost undetectable. So I don't think that's a cogent argument anymore.
I think NORAD sees them a lot because my understanding was that before 2001, NORAD would only institute scrambles if unknown aircraft were approaching U.S. or Canadian airspace. Since 9/11, they started doing scrambles if they found something within the contiguous 48 states. And my understanding is they were finding a lot of unknown. They were tracking unknown objects, and they'd scramble and they weren't there. And they finally give up scrambling, but they scrambled 5,000 or 6,000 times, is my understanding. So I think they see UFOs all the time. They just so they're there. And same thing with air traffic controllers. They're not looking for them. They're just vectoring aircraft. I mean, that gyrocopter that landed right on the Capitol grounds lawn, that thing flew through like 15 different radars, and it was picked up, but they don't look for it. So that's my argument. They're there all a lot, but we just don't see them. We don't look for them.
Well, there were, of course, the Washington National sightings, which were a big deal in July of 1952.
Right, absolutely.
Where they were seen on radar. And there were not only the objects on radar, but there were also fighters scrambled and did actually observe things. There were airline pilots who observed things. There were witnesses on the ground who observed things. So we've got radar at, I think, 3 separate locations and one time on airborne radar as well, fighter radar. And then we've got an awful lot of observers, which I think makes a very strong case for there being something more than just misidentifications. We're going to have to take a break here, coming up on our last segment. I'm here with Bill Puckett. We're talking about UFOs. Now we're talking about them on radar, for crying out loud, which is not a bad deal. And I've got a book coming out again next few months on the Washington National sightings. It's a look at the whole sort of thing and interviews that I conducted with people who were actually in the radar rooms at the time the sightings took place. So I think it gives some unique perspective about all of that. I will be back with Bill Puckett right after this. So hang around. And we are back. I'm here with Bill Puckett. We're talking about UFOs. We're talking about radar cases, for crying out loud. We've talked about the O'Hare case, which I think is an exciting case. And we were talking a little bit about the Washington National. Are you very familiar with the Washington National sightings? I mean, that's ancient history to the UFO era.
Yes, I'm familiar with them. My understanding is that happened over 2 weekends in July of 1952. For some reason.
Absolutely. Yes, correct.
And
2 consecutive Saturday nights.
Yes, I believe that was right. And they saw several objects on radar and they'd scramble and they wouldn't find anything. And Harry Truman talked about it a little bit. And then that general came out and tried to debunk it to the press. He had a press release. I understanding that behind the scenes, he told a different story off the record, my understanding. I can't remember the name of that general.
Stanford.
Stanford, yeah. And but he gave that press conference and he recognized UFOs were there, but said they were no threat to the security of the United States. But yet it happened, and they showed up on radar, and explaining that away in Blue Book as anomalous propagation and temperature inversions is ludicrous. I've done a lot of studies on anomalous propagation, and that just didn't appear to be a good explanation for radar ducting or whatever refraction causing that at that particular time.
Well, the one thing that I found interesting in the press conference that he held, interestingly enough, one of the other participants of the conference was Roger Ramey of Roswell fame.
Oh, I didn't know that.
He was there. There's a picture of him and Sanford and Ed Ruppelt and 2 other people. That's pretty famous. It's gone around the UFO field quite a bit. And I always got the impression by reading the transcript of the press conference that the idea of it being a temperature inversion sort of evolved inadvertently out of the press conference, that they really hadn't shown up to push that idea, and the press kind of glommed onto it immediately as an explanation and ran with it, and it became temperature inversion. But the real importance of that whole series of events was the Robertson panel, which was commissioned in January of 1953, which was sponsored by the CIA. And then they came out with the idea, well, there's no threat to national security. I'm thinking if you've got things invading our, what they call the ADIZ, Air Defense Interior Zone or something like that, they crossed that, which is sort of the radar fence or an invisible fence around the country. If you cross over that, you become an unknown if you haven't properly identified yourself. That could become an issue of national defense. You need to know what's flying around in your airspace. And yet they kind of poo-pooed the idea that it was national defense, that there was nothing to it, and that we needed to debunk the UFOs, take the mystery out of them, which apparently has failed since we're still talking about it in 2022.
Well, I've had some, not only have I done stuff on paper about anomalous propagation, I've actually used the same algorithm that Project Blue Book used to determine anomalous propagation, and I found some errors in some of their calculations. But I ran a weather radar summer of 1974 till Labor Day. I saw anomalous propagation probably at most 2 nights, where I would say, oh, look at all that stuff out there. And I saw objects flying through. Some of them were probably aircraft a lot of times. And again, the beam width is narrow. This was a 5-centimeter Enterprise Electronics radar, which is somewhat similar to Doppler in a lot of respects to the technology. But anomalous propagation is just not something that happens a whole lot. And it depends on the area, the time of the year, and etc. But it does happen. But
wouldn't the radar operators be familiar with the anomalous propagations on the radars? I mean, it would come up periodically, and it's, well, you know, this happens somewhat, and that's what that is. It's not a solid object.
Absolutely. I think more of an explanation would be, well, it could be other things. It could be birds, or, in the case of Doppler radar, it'll pick up insects also. But rather than anomalous propagation, it could be picking up something else. I know that the FAA, I found this with some of the local traffic control sites, they have an algorithm that they filter the digital data through it, and it filters out all the radar angels, anomalous propagation, and birds and everything, and just leaves objects that are actually tracked. And it's very interesting what you find. There are objects out there. They're flying very fast, and they're not aircraft because there's no transponders. So these aren't reported as UFOs, but they are. They're UFOs on radar too.
Which are not necessarily alien spacecraft, but they are UFOs.
But there's something unidentified flying through.
There was an interesting case here in the Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota area several years ago, where a meteor fell, and they tracked it on radar, on the Doppler radar, picked up the meteor fall, and they were able to find out exactly where the pieces of it landed. And a number of people, I think the meteorite men, went out there and tried to find pieces of it, and they would look across the roads and things with their metal detectors, and they picked up several scattered bits of the meteorite that fell, but it was picked up on radar.
Well, that's another point too about IFOs that we talked about at the beginning of the show. I mean, meteors and space junk generate a lot of UFO reports, but generally they're pretty, self-explanatory. But sometimes you'll see blinking lights and stuff, and it adds a little bit of, intrigue to it. But yet, some of them are unusual, but if you really look at it, you can generally figure out what it is. And then there's a lot of them that slip through the cracks that I consider UFOs, but they're probably IFOs, but I just don't have enough data to make that determination.
Well, you said something that's interesting, because again, we're talking about, well, they're not on radar, they don't exist. But you're suggesting the radars are set up to discriminate against things that are outside specific parameters. You're looking for, the radar's looking for aircraft, which set up probably height limits and speed limits and that sort of thing. And if the UFO is operating outside those parameters, it wouldn't be picked up or wouldn't be displayed by the radar. It would be discriminated or taken out of the radar display.
Well, the filtering algorithm, and again, I don't know exactly what to use. I know like Spokane, I found they were doing it, and I found it on some other sites. I can't specifically remember. I do remember Spokane because I did find some corroboration. This was a MUFON case in Washington State where some videos were taken, and we found echoes right where the videos were taken, unknown, and those were tracked objects. So that was a radar visual. I don't have that case at my fingertips, but I do know that was a good radar visual, and I haven't had a lot of them. But yet, when they do that filtering, and maybe they are filtering real UFOs out of there too. I don't know, but I know that what's left behind, if it's not aircraft, it's probably UFOs, or at least unidentified.
Well, the interesting thing is, is they can pick up insects and birds and all of this sort of thing. And it would seem to me that if you didn't have some way to discriminate, looking for aircraft, that's what they're doing, is looking for aircraft, that your radar screen would be just cluttered with all kinds of things that would confuse the issue.
Right. Well, Doppler radar, I believe, has a little bit shorter wave radar, and it has a shorter wavelength. It's going to pick up smaller objects. I mean, weather radar has picked up refraction for hydrometeors, which is rain and snow and ice crystals. And the new Doppler radars have a lot of advanced technology with wind fields, dual polarization, and other things that make it, so they can figure out where hail is and tornadoes and etc. So, but it's different technology, but it can pick up objects also, but it's not specifically designed to it. I know that case up there in Idaho, case that I was interviewed on the Close Encounters series. These pilots saw this triangular-shaped UFO in their hunting camp. I went back and looked at Doppler radar from Boise, and 150 miles away, within 10 miles of where these hunters were, there were blips. And I showed it to the producer, the director, and they put them at the end of the show. I really think that Doppler radar picked up that UFO. I really do. Because
we're going to have to leave
way
it
out of ground clutter and everything.
We're going to have to leave it there. We're going to have to leave it there because we're out of time.
Okay.
I appreciate you showing up and schooling us on Doppler radars and how that operates, because I think it is important to understand that just because it's not on radar doesn't mean it wasn't there, given the way the radars work in today's environment. Thank you very much, Bill. And like I say, the website is www.ufosnw.com. And his other one is www.ufosightingsmontana.com, all lowercase letters. Take a look at that and you'll might find some interesting stuff there. I look at the site periodically myself. My blog is www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com, and I usually have additional information available there and links to other websites or other articles I've done that provides additional information about what we've talked about today. And once again, I have not that long ago, the book that came out was Understanding Roswell, and I think it's important to take a look at it because it provides a perspective. It might say a different perspective from what the other UFO books have talked about in the Roswell case. Tries to boil it down to its essence, get rid of the nonsensical stories that we've been told about why they're nonsensical and why we need to get rid of them. Shows that the explanations being offered by the skeptical community simply don't work. That there really is no explanation for what fell with Roswell. If you want to leap to the extraterrestrial, here's the point to do that. Next week, I'm going to be talking to Kurt Collins. We're going to be talking about the UFOs with flying saucers, history forgotten, that sort of thing from his perspective. And I will be back in 167 hours. So thank you for tuning in, and we'll chat with you then.